Hello there, and welcome back to Boring History, where the stories of the past will gently carry you into your dreams. My voice is here to keep you company tonight as we journey together through time to a land where the ordinary world feels very far away. Tonight, we're traveling to a realm of golden sand, where emerald rivers flow through endless desert, and where kings were worshipped as living gods, ancient Egypt. But we won't be talking about the glorious battles you might remember from school, or the grand inventions that changed the world. Instead, we're going to quietly lift the curtain on daily life. A life that was, as you'll discover, both breathtakingly magnificent and surprisingly inconvenient, and sometimes, well, quite concerning. You see, being a pharaoh wasn't quite the dream job you might imagine. Yes, there was gold, more gold than you could ever count. There were palaces that gleamed like jewels under the desert sun. Servants who attended to every need. But there was also something else. Something the history books often forget to mention. The crushing weight of being considered divine while still being entirely, helplessly human. Tonight, we'll walk through a typical day in the life of these god kings. We'll see how they woke each morning to the sound of blind musicians, because no ordinary person was allowed to see the pharaoh before he was properly prepared for the world. We'll discover what they ate for breakfast, and why there was always someone standing nearby whose only job was to taste their food first. We'll peek behind the golden curtains of the royal harem, where hundreds of wives and concubines lived in a world that was part paradise, part prison, and part chess game where the stakes were life and death. And we'll explore their greatest obsession. The one thing that consumed more of their wealth, their time, and their thoughts than anything else. Building a perfect world for after they died, because this life, no matter how golden, was just the rehearsal. If you'd like, let me know where in the world you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. It's fascinating to imagine that we're sharing this story together, even though we might be thousands of miles apart. Now, let's begin our journey into the land of eternal sand and forgotten dreams. Close your eyes, or just let them grow heavy and unfocused. Let your breathing slow down, and imagine that you're standing in the middle of a desert night. The air around you is cool and crisp, a blessed relief after a day when the sun blazed so fiercely that the very stones seemed to shimmer with heat. But now the desert has transformed into something entirely different, something almost magical. Above you stretches a sky of the deepest black velvet, dotted with millions upon millions of stars, more stars than you've ever seen in your life. They shine with a brilliance that seems impossible, each one a tiny diamond sewn into the fabric of infinity. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a river of light, so clear and bright that you feel you could almost reach up and touch it. In the distance, their shadows long and mysterious against the sand, stand the great monuments, the pyramids, silent and magnificent. They rise from the desert floor like man-made mountains, their surfaces smooth and pale in the starlight. You can barely make out their edges against the star-filled sky, but their presence is unmistakable, ancient, eternal. Watching over this timeless landscape, listen. Can you hear it? The wind, whispering softly through the palm fronds somewhere nearby. It's the gentlest sound, like nature itself is sharing secrets. The palms rustle with a dry, peaceful whisper, a sound that speaks of oases and life in this vast ocean of sand. Breathe in slowly and catch that faint, mystical fragrance drifting on the night air. Frankincense, burning somewhere in a distant temple. The smoke rises invisible in the darkness, but its scent reaches you, warm and resinous, ancient and sacred. It's the smell of prayers and rituals that have been performed here for thousands of years. Beneath your feet, the sand is still warm from the day's heat, but cooling now in the desert night. You can feel the vastness around you, the incredible silence that seems to stretch on forever. It's not the absence of sound, but something deeper, the presence of time itself, moving so slowly here that each moment feels like it could last an eternity. This is the world where our pharaohs lived and ruled, where they walked beneath these same stars, where they felt this same desert wind against their skin, where they breathed in these same mysterious fragrances carried on the night air. And in this peaceful, timeless place, with the stars keeping watch overhead and the ancient monuments standing silent guard, we can begin to understand what it meant to live as a god among mortals, to rule over one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known, while still being, at heart, simply human. So settle in. Let this desert peace wash over you, and prepare to walk in the footsteps of kings. In the hours ahead, we'll explore together the lives of those who ruled this ancient land, the pharaohs. We'll see how they awakened each morning, what they ate for their meals, and how they faced the extraordinary pressures of being considered a living god, while dealing with all the ordinary human needs and feelings that gods, well, aren't supposed to have. We'll witness their morning rituals, performed by dozens of silent servants. We'll walk through their golden halls, where every footstep echoed with the weight of divine responsibility. We'll sit at their tables, where even the act of eating became a careful dance between pleasure and paranoia. And we'll also uncover some of the darker secrets, the stories that textbooks often skip over, the family relationships that would make modern people quite uncomfortable, the political schemes that played out behind palace walls, the lengths they went to in preparing for death, because for a pharaoh, death wasn't an ending. It was the most important job interview of their existence. But don't worry, everything will be told in the same gentle, steady rhythm, just enough to keep your mind mildly curious, but never enough to disturb the peaceful drowsiness that's already beginning to settle over you. Think of this as a bedtime story, but one where the characters happen to rule empires and wore crowns of gold and had their bodies preserved for eternity. So now, adjust your pillows. Find that perfect, comfortable position. Take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. Feel your body sinking deeper into rest, while your mind prepares to drift back through time. Let's begin our journey into the surprisingly complicated world of being a god king in ancient Egypt. Chapter 1. The Divine Burden, a Day in the Langshan. Have you ever complained about having to wake up early for work? About that jarring alarm clock? Or the rush to get ready? Or the feeling that your morning belongs to everyone but you? Well, try to imagine you're a pharaoh. Your sleep isn't your own. It's considered a mystical journey, where your soul travels to commune with the gods, and your awakening isn't a private moment of stretching and yawning. It's a public ceremony, witnessed by dozens of people, each one playing their carefully rehearsed role in bringing a god back to the world of the living. The first sounds that reach the pharaoh's ears aren't the harsh notes of bronze trumpets or the clash of ceremony, but something much more gentle, much more mysterious: the soft, haunting melody of flutes, played by musicians who cannot see him because they are blind. You see, no ordinary mortal is allowed to look upon the pharaoh while he's still vulnerable, still human, still caught between the world of dreams and the world of divine responsibility. So the palace employs blind musicians whose fingers dance across reed instruments, creating melodies that seem to float on the morning air like incense. The music drifts through the royal bedchamber, mixing with the sound of bare feet moving silently across polished stone floors. Dozens of servants, each one trained from childhood in the art of absolute quiet, begin to file into the room. Their movements are so practiced, so perfectly choreographed, that they seem to glide rather than walk. The air itself begins to change, filling with the rich, warm scent of myrrh and the lighter, more ethereal fragrance of frankincense. These aren't just pleasant aromas. They're sacred perfumes, burned in golden censers to purify the space where divinity returns to earthly form. The smoke curls upward in lazy spirals, creating an atmosphere that's part bedroom, part temple. Then comes the water, cool and precious, drawn fresh from the Nile just before dawn. You can almost hear it, the gentle sound of liquid being poured into golden basins, the soft splash as it's ladled by trembling hands. This isn't just washing, it's a ritual rebirth. As the sacred waters of Egypt's lifeblood river wash away the night and prepare the divine body for another day of being. Well, divine. But here's where the morning routine becomes less glamorous. The pharaoh must be completely shaved, not just his face, but his entire head, his entire body. Every hair must be removed to prevent the possibility of lice or fleas, because apparently, even gods can get infested with parasites. Imagine the sensation: bronze razors, sharp but not quite sharp enough, scraping across tender skin. The process takes nearly an hour, and it must be done every single day, because divine perfection requires constant maintenance. The servants work in absolute silence, their hands steady despite the enormous responsibility. After all, one slip of the razor, one accidental nick on the divine skin, could be interpreted as an omen, or worse, as an act of treason. Once the shaving is complete, comes the oiling. The pharaoh's skin is massaged with precious unguents, oils imported from far-off lands, mixed with ground pearls and gold dust. The sensation must be overwhelming. Hands working warm oil into every inch of skin, while the scent of exotic perfumes fills the air. It's a skincare routine so thorough, so luxurious, that it would make the most expensive modern spa look like a quick shower. But remember, this isn't relaxation. This is preparation. Preparation to spend another day being worshipped, being watched, being responsible for the balance of the entire universe. Every movement, every expression, every decision will be scrutinized by hundreds of people who believe you're capable of making the sun rise, the Nile flood, and the crops grow, and all of this, every single morning, just to look sufficiently godlike to begin another day. The irony is delicious, isn't it? All this effort, all this ceremony, all this luxury, just to prepare for a life where you can never truly be yourself, where every moment is a performance, and where privacy is as rare and precious as the gold that adorns your body. By the time the morning ritual is complete, the sun has risen fully over the desert, its rays slanting through the palace windows, illuminating a figure who looks every inch the divine Pharaoh the people expect to see. Perfect, golden, untouchable. But underneath all that perfection, inside that perfectly groomed divine exterior, beats the heart of someone who probably just wants to sleep in, have a cup of coffee, and read the morning news in peace. Sound familiar? Now comes perhaps the most mesmerizing part of the morning ritual, the application of makeup. But this isn't makeup as we understand it today. This is war paint, spiritual armor, and haute couture, all rolled into one incredibly elaborate process. Picture this. The pharaoh sits perfectly still as a statue, while skilled artisans approach with their precious tools. Small palettes made of ivory and gold, tiny brushes crafted from the finest reeds, and most importantly, the sacred cosmetics that will transform a mortal face into the visage of a god. First comes the coal, ground from galena, a lead-based mineral that creates the deepest, most intense black you can imagine. The artist, and they truly are artists, dips a thin reed brush into the mixture. The coal has been ground so fine it feels like silk between the fingers, mixed with animal fat and tree resin to create a paste that will stay perfect all day, even under the scorching desert sun. Watch as the brush moves, slowly, methodically, around the pharaoh's eyes. The line begins at the inner corner, sweeps along the lower lid, then curves upward and outward, extending far beyond the natural shape of the eye, creating those iconic almond shapes we recognize from tomb paintings. Each stroke is deliberate, precise, almost meditative in its rhythm. The black coal serves multiple purposes. In the blazing Egyptian sun, those dark lines act like the black paint under a football player's eyes, reducing glare and protecting vision. But more importantly, much more importantly, the coal is believed to be a powerful charm against the evil eye. Those dark, dramatic lines aren't just fashion, they're spiritual protection, a barrier against jealousy, curses, and malevolent spirits. Next comes the malachite. This brilliant green mineral, ground into powder so fine it almost seems to glow, is mixed with precious oils until it becomes a shimmering paste the color of spring leaves, or the deepest parts of the Nile. The same careful brush now traces the upper eyelids, adding a stripe of vivid green that makes the eyes appear larger, more otherworldly, more divine. The green isn't just beautiful, it's magical. Malachite is sacred to Hathor, the goddess of beauty and protection. Wearing it connects the pharaoh to her power, ensures her favor, and announces to everyone who sees him that he carries the blessing of the gods on his very face. The process is hypnotically slow. Each eye takes nearly 20 minutes to complete. The artist must be perfect, because any smudge, any uneven line, any imperfection could be seen as a bad omen. The steady hand moves with practiced precision, the brush dancing across the royal features with the delicacy of a butterfly's wing. The next time you apply eyeliner, remember that you're continuing a tradition that's 5,000 years old. Only, you probably don't have to worry about demonic possession if you smudge it a little. But the makeup is only the beginning. Now comes the jewelry, and this is where the true weight of divinity makes itself known. Literally, golden collar necklaces, each one weighing several pounds, are carefully placed around the pharaoh's neck. These aren't delicate chains. They're massive works of art. Sheet gold hammered into intricate patterns, inlaid with lapis lazuli, the color of midnight sky, carnelian like drops of sunset, and turquoise, the shade of perfect summer water. Feel the weight settling on the royal shoulders, the cold touch of metal against warm skin. Each piece is designed to catch and reflect light, to make the wearer seem to glow from within. But the cumulative effect is exhausting. By the time all the ceremonial jewelry is in place, the pharaoh is carrying nearly 20 pounds of precious metal and stone. Bracelets, thick bands of gold that encircle wrists and upper arms, rings on every finger, each one a masterpiece of the goldsmith's art, a jeweled belt that emphasizes the royal waist while adding yet more weight. Everything designed to proclaim wealth, power, divine status, and unfortunately, to make every movement slow and deliberate. Finally, the crowns. The pharaoh doesn't wear just one crown. Depending on the occasion, there's the red crown of Lower Egypt, the white crown of Upper Egypt, or the magnificent double crown that combines both. Each one is a work of art, but also a burden. made of gold and precious materials. These crowns can weigh up to 15 pounds. Imagine carrying a bowling ball on your head all day while trying to look serene, dignified, and godlike. The neck muscles strain, the shoulders ache, but the expression must remain perfect because hundreds of people are watching, waiting for any sign of weakness, any hint that their God King is, well, merely human. By the time the morning transformation is complete, the Pharaoh has become a walking work of art, every surface gleaming, every line perfect, every detail calculated to inspire awe and devotion. But underneath all that gold and glory, there's still just a person, probably wishing they could wear comfortable clothes and sneakers. The sun climbs higher, and the day's real work is about to begin. Now, fully adorned in gold and divine authority, the Pharaoh must begin the most important work of his day, not governing Egypt, though that's certainly on the schedule, but something far more crucial, something that most people today would find absolutely mind-boggling. He must keep the universe from falling apart. You see, in ancient Egyptian belief, the cosmos is not a self-sustaining system. It's more like an incredibly complex machine that requires constant maintenance. And the Pharaoh, he's not just the king of Egypt. He's the chief engineer of reality itself, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the divine order that keeps chaos at bay. Imagine the worst meeting you've ever attended. Now multiply that stress by the knowledge that if you lose focus, if you miss a single detail, the entire civilization might collapse, the sun might fail to rise, and the forces of darkness could consume the world. That is a Tuesday morning for a pharaoh. The first stop, always, is the temple, not for personal worship, but for work, divine maintenance work. The pharaoh enters the sacred space, and immediately the temperature seems to drop. The air is thick with incense, heavy with the weight of expectation, and absolutely silent except for the soft shuffle of sandaled feet on ancient stone. Here, in the innermost sanctuary, sits the statue of the god. And this isn't just a representation. In Egyptian belief, the god actually inhabits this golden figure, which means the pharaoh is about to have a face-to-face meeting with an actual deity. No pressure at all. The morning ritual begins. The pharaoh must personally wake the god, just as his servants woke him. He approaches the statue, slowly, reverently, and begins the ancient words, phrases that have been repeated every single morning for hundreds of years. His voice echoes in the stone chamber, steady, rhythmic, hypnotic. The words seem to go on forever. O great Ra, Lord of the heavens, awakener of all that sleeps, we greet you in your rising. We honor you in your glory. We ask for your blessing on this day, on this land, on your people who serve you. Hour after hour, the pharaoh stands before the statue. His legs begin to ache. His back starts to protest, but he cannot sit. cannot rest, cannot show any sign of weakness or fatigue, because the God is watching, and the God expects perfection. The ritual isn't just words. There's also the offering of food, precious oils, fine linens. The Pharaoh must personally present each item, explain its purpose, request the god's acceptance. It's like the most elaborate dinner party you've ever hosted, except your guest is invisible, all-powerful, and capable of destroying the world if displeased. By the time the morning temple duties are complete, the sun has climbed high in the sky, and the Pharaoh's real headaches are just beginning. Because now, it's time for government. Picture the scene. A vast hall, its ceiling supported by columns the size of ancient trees. The air shimmers with heat despite the early hour. And arrayed before the golden throne, hundreds of officials, administrators, priests, generals, and petitioners, all waiting, all needing something, all believing that their particular problem is the most important thing in the world. The Grand Vizier approaches first, his arms full of scrolls, reports from across the kingdom. His voice drones on in the peculiar monotone that all bureaucrats seem to master. Your Divine Majesty, the grain harvest in the southern provinces is adequate, though below projections from the previous year. The Temple of Ptah requests additional funding for roof repairs. There has been a boundary dispute between two farming families in the Delta region. And so it goes, for hours, an endless parade of administrative details, tax revenues, construction projects, trade agreements, judicial disputes, each one requiring the Pharaoh's attention, his decision, his divine wisdom. Meanwhile, the weight of that golden crown seems to increase with every passing minute. The most mind-numbing part isn't the big decisions about war and peace. Those at least have some drama. It's the small stuff, the everyday bureaucracy of running a civilization. Listen to this actual report, preserved on papyrus. In the matter of the stolen goat belonging to the farmer Keti, the accused, one Seneb, claims the animal wandered onto his property of its own accord. However, witness testimony suggests you can almost see the Pharaoh's eyes glazing over, his divine attention wandering, while maintaining that perfect expression of interested concern. Because showing boredom, showing frustration, showing any human emotion would undermine the carefully constructed image of divine omniscience. But here's the truly exhausting part. Every decision, every judgment, every tiny administrative choice is believed to have cosmic significance. Rule in favor of the wrong farmer, and the Nile might not flood properly. Show mercy to the wrong criminal, and the balance of Mayat could be disrupted. Make any mistake, any error in judgment, and the consequences could ripple through the universe itself. The afternoon stretches on. More reports, more decisions, more endless bureaucracy. The golden throne, which looked so magnificent in the morning light, now feels like an elaborate torture device. The jeweled collar around the royal neck grows heavier With each passing hour, the ceremonial beard, attached with golden straps, begins to chafe. Yet through it all, the Pharaoh must maintain perfect composure, perfect attention, perfect divine authority, because hundreds of people are watching. Thousands more depend on these decisions, and millions believe that their God King's wisdom is all that stands between civilization and chaos. By late afternoon, when the last petitioner has been heard, the last report received, the last judgment rendered, the Pharaoh has spent nearly 8 hours standing, listening, deciding, maintaining the cosmic order, one bureaucratic decision at a time. And tomorrow, it will all begin again. The same rituals, the same responsibilities, the same crushing weight of divine expectation. Day after day, year after year, until death finally releases him from the burden of being, perpetually, perfectly, exhaustingly divine. No wonder they spent so much time planning their afterlife. After a career like that, eternity in a peaceful tomb probably seemed like a vacation. After hours of cosmic responsibility and bureaucratic tedium, even a God King needs lunch. And what a lunch it is! The royal dining chamber fills with aromas that would make any modern food lover weep with envy. But as with everything in a pharaoh's life, even eating comes with its own unique complications. The feast begins to arrive, carried on golden platters by a silent procession of servants. First comes the roasted goose, its skin crackling and golden brown, seasoned with cumin and coriander, stuffed with figs and nuts. The meat falls off the bone, tender and rich, filling the air with that intoxicating scent of perfectly roasted fowl. Next, fresh catfish from the Nile, caught just hours ago in the sacred waters, grilled over charcoal and herbs. The fish flakes perfectly, moist and delicate, with that clean, river-fresh taste that speaks of Egypt's lifeblood. It's served with vegetables grown in the royal gardens, onions and leeks and garlic, all glistening with olive oil. Then comes the bread. Oh, the bread, fresh from the royal ovens, still warm, made with the finest wheat flour and sweetened with honey. When you break it open, steam rises like incense, and the smell, warm and yeasty and sweet, fills your nostrils with pure comfort. It's the kind of bread that makes you understand why ancient peoples considered grain a gift from the gods. Dates, plump and sweet, imported from distant oases, each one like a little burst of concentrated sunshine. Figs, fresh and juicy, their flesh pink and perfect. And to wash it all down, wine, not just any wine, but vintage, pressed from grapes grown in the Delta, aged in clay jars sealed with beeswax. The wine is dark and rich, with just a hint of sweetness. The taste of dates and honey lingering on the tongue. It should be perfect, this moment of luxury, this brief respite from divine responsibility. The Pharaoh should be able to simply enjoy his meal Savor the exquisite flavors. Relax for just a few moments. But he can't. Because before the Pharaoh takes a single bite, someone else must eat first. Watch as a young man approaches, one of the royal food tasters. His face is carefully neutral, but you can see it in his eyes. That flash of, is it fear? Resignation? The knowledge that every meal might be his last? The taster takes a small portion of the goose, chews slowly, swallows. Everyone waits 10 seconds, 20, 30. Still standing, still breathing. The goose is safe. Now the fish. The same careful process, the same tense silence, the same collective held breath. The bread, the dates, the wine. Each item must be tested. Each bite a small gamble with death. Only after several minutes, when it's clear the taster shows no signs of distress, no sudden collapse, no foaming at the mouth. Only then can the Pharaoh begin to eat. But even as he savors that first bite of perfectly seasoned goose, even as the honey bread melts on his tongue, even as the wine warms his throat, there's always that nagging thought, that whisper of paranoia. What if the poison is slow acting? What if it's designed to take effect hours later? What if whoever wants him dead is patient enough to wait, to plan, to strike when the taster is long gone and forgotten? Every meal becomes a chess game. Every bite a calculated risk. Trust, that most basic human need, is a luxury the Pharaoh simply cannot afford. So he eats his magnificent lunch, surrounded by golden plates and crystal goblets, tasting flavors that most people can only dream of, while a part of his mind remains forever vigilant, forever suspicious, forever alone. The wine may be sweet, but it carries the bitter aftertaste of absolute power and absolute vulnerability. Even in the act of nourishment, even in this most basic human pleasure, the Pharaoh remains, perpetually, a prisoner of his own divinity. As the afternoon heat begins to fade, and the harsh Egyptian sun softens into something more forgiving, the Pharaoh's day finally shifts toward what passes for relaxation in the life of a god-king. The royal barge awaits, moored at the palace's private dock. And what a magnificent vessel it is! The hull gleams with gold leaf that catches the slanted evening light, making the entire boat appear to be crafted from solid sunlight. Silk awnings in royal blue and white flutter gently in the river breeze, while carved lotus blossoms and sacred Ankh symbols decorate every surface. The Pharaoh steps aboard, his sandaled feet silent on the polished cedar decking. Behind him, a carefully orchestrated procession. His personal guards, their bronze spears glinting, musicians carrying their instruments, servants bearing golden cups and pitchers of wine, and of course, the ever-present food taster, because even leisure requires precautions. The barge pushes away from shore, guided by skilled oarsmen whose strokes are perfectly synchronized, barely disturbing the Nile's surface. The river is like liquid amber in the evening light, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it seems they're sailing through the heavens themselves. From the shore, people gather to watch. Fishermen pause in their work. Children point and wave. Farmers stop their evening tasks. To them, this golden vessel carrying their God King is like a piece of the divine world made visible. But to the Pharaoh, it's just another performance, another moment when privacy is impossible, when every gesture must be carefully considered. On deck, dancers begin to move, their bodies fluid as water, interpreting ancient stories with graceful arms and swaying hips. The sound of sistrums, those metallic rattles sacred to the goddess Hathor, mingles with the gentle plash of oars and the whisper of wind through the awnings. Musicians play harps and flutes, their melodies floating across the water like prayers. The Pharaoh watches, appreciates the artistry, but even this simple pleasure comes with weight. These aren't just entertainers, they're his entertainers. Their very lives dependent on his approval. Their art performed under the constant pressure of pleasing someone who holds absolute power over their fate. As the barge glides peacefully downstream, servants bring out the Senate board. This, finally, might seem like a moment of simple, private enjoyment. The ancient game, with its 30 squares laid out in 3 rows, its carved playing pieces worn smooth by countless royal fingers. But Senet isn't just a game, it's practice, a rehearsal for the most important journey the Pharaoh will ever take, the voyage through the underworld after death. Each move of the pieces represents a step through the trials and challenges that await in the afterlife. Every strategy session is, in a way, preparation for eternity. The Pharaoh studies the board, contemplating his next move, while scribes nearby record the game for posterity, because even his leisure activities might contain divine significance, might offer clues about the cosmic order. Nothing, absolutely nothing, can be purely personal, purely spontaneous, purely fun. Back at the palace, as evening deepens, come the most unusual companions of all, the Pharaoh's exotic pets. These aren't cats and dogs, though there are plenty of those. These are creatures that announce power, dominance, the ability to tame the untamable. A trained baboon, intelligent eyes watching every movement, chatters softly as it approaches. These sacred animals, associated with the god Thoth, are believed to possess wisdom and divine insight. The Pharaoh scratches behind its ears, and for a moment, just a moment, there's something like genuine affection, something real and unguarded. Then there's the hyena, spotted and powerful, trained from a cub to be gentle with human hands. It nuzzles against the royal robes, seeking attention, and even more impressive, a young lion, mane just beginning to develop, padding across the courtyard with lazy confidence. Its purr, when the Pharaoh strokes its golden fur, is like distant thunder. These moments, playing with these magnificent creatures might be the closest the Pharaoh comes to genuine relaxation, to being simply human. But even here, even in these brief intervals of what might be called happiness, guards stand at attention nearby. Servants hover at the edges of vision, ready to intervene if play becomes dangerous, ready to record every interaction for the royal chronicles. The stars begin to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. The same stars that watched over the ancient pyramids, that guided the first pharaohs, that will outlast this dynasty and the next. Their cold light seems to whisper of eternity, of the endless cycle of days that stretches ahead, each one nearly identical to this one. Finally, as the night grows deep, the pharaoh retires to his private chambers. The guards take their positions outside. The servants withdraw. The palace settles into the peculiar quiet that comes only in the small hours. At last, he is alone, truly alone, with just his thoughts, his exhaustion, and the weight of tomorrow's responsibilities already pressing down like that heavy golden crown. But is he really alone? Or is he simply, finally, face to face with the loneliest truth of all, that absolute power, absolute divinity, absolute responsibility creates a solitude so complete, so profound, that it transcends the physical presence of others. In the silence of his golden chamber, surrounded by unimaginable luxury, the pharaoh closes his eyes and perhaps, just perhaps, dreams of being ordinary. Chapter 2. The Sacred and the Sinister. Family, Power, and Poison. In our culture, marriage between close relatives is, well, unthinkable, forbidden, the stuff of scandals and whispered gossip. But for a pharaoh, it wasn't just acceptable, it was a job requirement. You see, to keep the divine bloodline pure, to maintain that sacred connection to the gods, the best way, the only truly safe way, was to marry someone whose blood was as close to yours as possible. Someone like your sister. This wasn't born from some twisted desire or moral corruption. It was business, divine business. The pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was a living god. And gods, well, gods don't marry mortals. They marry other gods. And who better to be a goddess than someone who shares your divine heritage, your sacred bloodline, your parents? The logic, when you think about it from their perspective, is almost elegant. The gods themselves set the precedent. Osiris, lord of the underworld, married his sister Isis, the great mother goddess. Their union was considered the perfect divine partnership, the model that all royal marriages should follow. What worked for the gods surely would work for their earthly representatives. So, generation after generation, brother married sister, uncle married niece, cousin married cousin, all in the name of preserving that precious, irreplaceable, divine essence. The royal family tree didn't branch so much as twist back on itself, creating loops and knots that would make a genealogist weep. The ceremonies were magnificent. Golden temples filled with incense and chanting, elaborate rituals that lasted for days, the bride and groom, resplendent in their divine regalia, looked every inch the gods they claimed to be. But behind all that pageantry, all that religious justification, biology was keeping its own, much more merciless, accounting. Let me tell you about Tutankhamun, the boy king, the golden pharaoh whose treasure-filled tomb has dazzled the world for nearly a century. He's become the poster child for ancient Egyptian splendor. His burial mask, one of the most recognizable artifacts in human history. But the real story of Tutankhamun, the story they don't put on the museum placards, is far more sobering. This beautiful golden boy, this symbol of divine perfection, was actually the tragic result of generations of divine marriages. His parents, Akhenaten, and most likely Akhenaten's sister, were themselves products of royal inbreeding. Their son, poor Tutankhamun, inherited more than just a throne. Picture this young man, barely 18 when he died. His body tells a story that's both heartbreaking and horrifying. CT scans of his mummy reveal a cleft palate, making speech difficult, a severely overbite, affecting his ability to eat properly, a club foot that would have made walking painful, requiring him to use a cane, dozens of which were found in his tomb. His chest was malformed, one side caved inward, possibly crushing his heart and lungs. His hips were misaligned, his spine curved in an unnatural way that would have caused constant pain. This was the price of divine purity, this litany of genetic disasters accumulating like compound interest over generations of careful, sacred marriages. But perhaps most tragically, Tutankhamun's immune system, weakened by centuries of inbreeding, left him vulnerable to diseases that a healthy person might easily survive. Recent DNA analysis suggests he died from malaria, a common illness that became fatal because his royal blood, his precious divine heritage, had been purified to the point of fragility. The irony is overwhelming, isn't it? In trying to create the perfect divine bloodline, they created something broken. In attempting to preserve godlike strength, they bred weakness. In pursuing immortal perfection, they guaranteed mortal suffering. And Tutankhamun wasn't unique. Throughout Egyptian history, royal children were born with similar complications, some so severe they never made it to adulthood. Others ruled briefly before succumbing to the genetic legacy of their divine ancestors. The very thing that was supposed to make them godlike made them heartbreakingly human. Yet the practice continued, because what was the alternative? To admit that the divine bloodline wasn't actually divine? To acknowledge that the God's chosen family was flawed? To confess that centuries of religious doctrine, of careful breeding, of sacred marriage had been a mistake? The palace physicians, those who tended to these royal children, must have known. They saw the pattern, the recurring deformities, the chronic illnesses, the shortened lifespans, but what could they say? How do you tell a living God that his divine heritage is poisoning him? So they prescribed herbal remedies, performed healing rituals, offered prayers to the gods, while secretly knowing that the real problem, the source of all this suffering, was the very thing that made their patients royalty. The wives and mothers, the sisters who became queens, they must have felt it too. The terrible weight of knowing that each pregnancy, each royal child, was a gamble with genetics, a roll of the dice where the stakes were, a human life, their own child's future, their dynasty's survival. And so, in the golden halls of power, surrounded by unimaginable wealth and luxury, these divine families lived with a secret that was rafiki, profoundly, heartbreakingly human. The knowledge that their greatest strength, their most sacred tradition, their divine birthright, was also their greatest weakness. Love, in the royal family, became entangled with duty, biology with theology, and the pursuit of perfection with the reality of profound, irreversible, genetic damage. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them. After contemplating the price of divine purity, if you think modern office politics are complicated, you've never spent time in an Egyptian royal harem. This wasn't the sensual paradise that Hollywood might have you imagine, with beautiful women lounging around, eating grapes, and painting their nails. No, the harem was something far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more politically sophisticated. Picture, if you will, a vast complex of interconnected rooms, courtyards, and gardens where hundreds of women lived, breathed, and schemed. The air itself seems thick with more than just incense. It's heavy with ambition, with whispered conversations, with the constant, almost electric tension of competing desires. Each woman here has one primary goal, not to please the Pharaoh, though that's certainly important, but to ensure that her son, her precious boy, becomes the next god king of Egypt. And with dozens of wives, concubines, and royal women all pursuing the same objective, well, things get interesting. Walk through these perfumed halls, and your senses are immediately overwhelmed. The air is thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense. Yes, but also with jasmine oil, rose water, coal mixed with precious metals, and dozens of other fragrances. Each woman trying to create a signature scent that will linger in the Pharaoh's memory. Make him think of her when she's not around. The sound is equally intoxicating and unsettling. Soft laughter drifts from behind silk curtains, but there's something calculated about it, too musical, too perfectly timed, like actresses performing for an invisible audience. Then there are the whispers, constant, sibilant, urgent, conversations that stop abruptly when footsteps approach. Let me tell you about Ramesses II, one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, who ruled for 66 years and had, conservatively, over 100 wives. His harem wasn't just large, it was a small city, a complex ecosystem of relationships, alliances, and rivalries that would make a soap opera writer weep with envy. Among his wives, several stand out, not for their beauty, though they were certainly beautiful, but for their political acumen. There was Nefertari, his beloved first wife, whose tomb is one of the most magnificent ever discovered. But there was also Iset-Nofret, the mother of his eventual successor, and Ma-Thorneferure, a Hittite princess married for diplomatic reasons, and dozens of others, each with her own agenda, her own supporters, her own carefully laid plans. The competition was breathtaking in its complexity. It wasn't enough to simply bear the pharaoh a son. Oh no, that was just the beginning. You had to ensure your son survived childhood in a world where royal children had a disturbing tendency to disappear, or develop sudden illnesses, or suffer tragic accidents. You had to cultivate relationships with the right priests, the correct generals, the most influential court officials. You needed to position your son in the line of succession, which required intimate knowledge of palace politics, religious law, and the ever-shifting dynamics of royal favor. Consider the daily routine. Each morning, these women would gather in their separate quarters, applying makeup that took hours to perfect. Each cosmetic choice was strategic, kohl lines drawn to catch the light just so, hair arranged in styles that referenced particular goddesses, jewelry selected to send subtle messages about status, lineage, and divine favor. The conversations, when you could catch fragments of them, were fascinating and terrifying. Did you notice how long the pharaoh spoke with Kamwaset yesterday? The priest of Ptah seems to favor Merempta lately. I heard that Amenhotep has been having difficulties with his studies. These weren't idle gossip sessions. They were intelligence briefings, strategic planning meetings, war councils. Each piece of information was carefully evaluated, cross-referenced, used to adjust tactics and alliances. And then there were the darker methods. Whispered rumors spoke of love potions, carefully crafted to make the pharaoh more attentive to particular wives. There were protective amulets, designed not just to bring good luck, but to deflect the malevolent intentions of rivals. Some women, it was said, consulted with magicians who could craft wax figures of enemies, pierce them with needles, and bury them under the full moon. Others sought out wise women who knew which herbs could influence a pregnancy, ensuring the birth of sons rather than daughters. The most successful women, like Nefertari, understood that the game required more than just beauty and cunning. It demanded genuine political skill. She became a diplomat in her own right, corresponding with foreign queens, participating in state ceremonies, building her own power base that existed independently of her husband's favor. But even she, even the beloved first wife, couldn't rest easy. Because in the harem, there was always someone younger, more beautiful, more ambitious, waiting for their moment, studying her methods, learning from her successes, and planning to surpass them. The tragedy, the real heartbreak of the harem, wasn't the competition itself. It was how it poisoned relationships that should have been sources of joy. Sisterhood became rivalry, motherhood became strategy, love became a weapon. Children grew up understanding that their very existence was part of a larger game, where the stakes were ultimate power, and the cost of losing could be everything. Late at night, when the palace grew quiet, when the servants withdrew, and the guards took their distant positions, you could sometimes hear, if you listened carefully, the sound of women crying, softly, behind closed doors. Tears for children who didn't survive the political games, for relationships destroyed by ambition, for the crushing loneliness of being surrounded by hundreds of people, none of whom you could truly trust. The harem, for all its luxury, for all its power and influence, was also a kind of prison, a beautiful, perfumed, politically sophisticated, emotionally devastating prison, where the most successful inmates were those who learned to sacrifice their hearts in service of their ambitions, and where the cost of motherhood was measured not just in love, but in the willingness to destroy anyone, absolutely anyone, who threatened your child's future. Sweet dreams in your simple, uncomplicated, beautifully anonymous, modern bed. Sometimes the most fascinating stories are also the most disturbing. And tonight, we delve into what might be history's first documented political thriller, a real-life palace mystery that reads like something from an ancient Egyptian detective novel, except it actually happened. Our story begins in the later years of Ramesses III's reign. Picture an aging pharaoh, still powerful, still divine, but no longer the vigorous warrior king of his youth. His step is slower now, his voice perhaps not quite as commanding. And in the golden halls of power, weakness, even the perception of weakness, can be dangerous. The year is approximately 1155 BCE, and after 31 years on the throne, Ramesses III has settled into what he believes will be a peaceful decline toward the afterlife. He has built his temples, secured Egypt's borders, and prepared his tomb. All that remains is the comfortable routine of aging divinity. But in the shadowed corridors of the harem, someone is making very different plans. Meet Ta, not the famous queen of that name, but a secondary wife. A woman whose beauty once caught the royal eye, but whose influence has waned with the passing years. She watches from the margins as younger wives bear sons, as her own position becomes increasingly precarious. But Ta has something many of the other wives lack: a son, Pentower, a young man with royal blood but little chance of inheritance. You see, he's not the eldest, not the favorite, not the chosen heir. He's what palace insiders might call expendable. The problem, as Ta sees it, is simple. Her son deserves the throne. Her bloodline deserves recognition. And if the current succession plan doesn't accommodate these facts, well, perhaps the succession plan needs to change. What follows is a conspiracy so intricate, so carefully planned, that it reads like a masterpiece of political fiction. Except every detail has been preserved on papyrus, court records that survived 3,000 years to tell us exactly how palace intrigue really works. TA begins quietly, carefully, building her network. She identifies sympathetic officials, guards who feel underappreciated, servants with grudges, priests who might benefit from a change in leadership. Each recruitment is delicate, each conversation a careful dance around treason. But this isn't just about political corruption. Oh no. TA understands that in ancient Egypt, successful revolution requires more than human allies. It requires divine assistance, or at least the appearance of divine favor. Enter the magicians, practitioners of Heka, the ancient Egyptian art that blends what we might call magic with medicine, psychology with pharmacology. These aren't stage performers with rabbits and top hats. These are serious practitioners of dangerous arts. The conspiracy expands to include the creation of wax figures, not toys, but carefully crafted representations of the pharaoh, designed to be influenced through sympathetic magic. The theory: if you can harm the wax figure through ritual and intention, you can weaken the man it represents. Night after night, in hidden chambers, these figures are pierced with needles, burned with sacred fires, buried in cursed ground, while whispered incantations call upon dark gods to withdraw their protection from the current pharaoh and transfer their favor to Pentawower. But magical assassination, even in ancient Egypt, requires a practical component. The wax figures and curses are psychological warfare, designed to weaken the pharaoh's confidence, make him paranoid, disrupt his sleep. But to actually remove him from power, the conspirators need something more direct. They recruit palace guards, men who stand close enough to the pharaoh to act decisively. They identify the perfect moment when the king will be alone, vulnerable, unprotected by his usual security. The assassination itself, when it comes, is swift, brutal, and effective. Court records, preserved in remarkable detail, describe how the pharaoh's throat was cut, how the divine blood of Ra's representative on earth pooled on the golden floors of his own palace. For a brief moment, it seems the conspiracy has succeeded. Pentawower begins making moves toward claiming the throne. TA emerges from the shadows, ready to become the mother of the new pharaoh. But palace coups, even successful ones, create their own problems. Because when you murder a god king, you don't just eliminate a political opponent. You commit sacrilege. You disturb the cosmic order. You invite divine retribution. And it turns out, Ramesses III had more loyal supporters than the conspirators realized. The legitimate heir, Prince Ramesses IV, still has powerful allies. The army remains faithful to the established succession. The priests, despite some defections, largely support continuity over revolution. The investigation that follows is thorough and merciless. Ancient Egyptian justice, when applied to regicide, is not known for its compassion. Every conspirator is hunted down, every connection explored, every supporter identified. The trial records, again preserved on papyrus, read like a court transcript from a modern murder case. Witness testimony, confessions extracted under pressure, detailed descriptions of who did what, when, and why. T.A., the mastermind, is sentenced to death. But in a final irony, she's not executed by the state. Instead, she's given the honor of taking her own life, a privilege reserved for those of royal blood, even treacherous royal blood. Pentawere, the would-be pharaoh, meets a similar fate. Forced suicide, a punishment that acknowledges his royal status while ensuring his permanent removal from the succession. The lesser conspirators, those without royal blood to protect them, face more conventional executions. The magical practitioners, the corrupt guards, the ambitious officials, all pay the ultimate price for their participation in sacred regicide. And so ends one of history's most carefully documented palace conspiracies, a plot that combined political ambition, religious manipulation, magical thinking, and cold-blooded murder, all in service of a mother's love for her son and a son's desire for power that was never meant to be his. The papyrus records conclude with the restoration of order, the proper succession, the divine balance restored. But they also serve as a permanent reminder that even in the land of god-kings, power is fragile, trust is rare, and family can be the most dangerous enemy of all. Sleep well in your simple, peaceful, wonderfully ordinary life. After all these dark tales of conspiracy and murder, of family betrayal and political poison, perhaps it's time for a different kind of story. The story of someone who didn't just survive the deadly game of Egyptian politics, but rewrote the rules entirely, and in doing so, became one of the most remarkable rulers in human history. Her name was Hatshepsut, and she did something that was supposed to be impossible. She became Pharaoh, not queen, not consort, not regent, but Pharaoh, a god-king, in a world that had never imagined such a thing could wear a woman's face. The path to this unprecedented achievement began, as so many Egyptian stories do, with death. Hatshepsut was married to Thutmose II, a pharaoh who ruled briefly before succumbing to illness, leaving behind a young son. Thutmose III, who was still a child, far too young to rule the most powerful empire on earth. In normal circumstances, a council of regents would govern until the boy came of age. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Hatshepsut wasn't a normal woman. She had been raised in the palace, educated alongside the princes, trained in statecraft and diplomacy. She understood power, not just how to wield it, but how it worked, how it flowed through the complex network of relationships that held the kingdom together. So, when her stepson inherited the throne, Hatshepsut stepped forward as regent. Initially, this seemed perfectly reasonable, even traditional. A wise stepmother guiding a young king, ensuring stability during his minority. What could be more natural? But as the months turned to years, something unprecedented began to happen. Hatshepsut didn't step back. Instead, she stepped forward, further and further, until she was no longer just advising the young pharaoh. She was ruling in his place. And then, in a move that must have shocked the ancient world, she did the unthinkable. She declared herself pharaoh, not co-ruler, not regent, but the sole divine ruler of Egypt, a woman, claiming the role that had belonged exclusively to men for over 1,000 years. But here's where Hatshepsut's true genius reveals itself. She understood that in a world where gender roles were carved in stone, literally carved into temple walls and religious texts, she couldn't simply announce her new status and expect acceptance. She had to transform herself. Picture the scene. In official portraits and statues, Hatshepsut begins to appear wearing the traditional pharaonic regalia, the Nemes headcloth, the uraeus serpent, the crook and flail. But most remarkably, the false beard, that artificial chin ornament that symbolized divine kingship. This wasn't cross-dressing in any modern sense. This was strategic transformation. Hatshepsut was literally reshaping herself into a form that Egyptian religion and culture could accept as pharaonic. She was becoming a god king, regardless of the body she happened to inhabit. The inscriptions tell the story. Early in her reign, they refer to her with feminine pronouns, she who rules. But as time passes, the language shifts, becomes deliberately ambiguous, then fully masculine. He who is beloved of Ra, Hatshepsut, was systematically rewriting not just her own identity, but the very language used to describe divine rulership. And remarkably, it worked for 22 years, longer than many male pharaohs. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt, and these weren't years of mere survival or holding the throne warm for someone else. These were years of unprecedented prosperity, innovation, and expansion. Under her rule, Egypt experienced a golden age of trade and exploration. She organized expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt, somewhere along the Red Sea coast, bringing back exotic animals, rare incense trees, gold and ivory and precious woods. These weren't military conquests, but commercial ventures, diplomatic missions that expanded Egypt's influence through wealth rather than warfare. The architecture of her reign. Oh, the architecture. Hatshepsut built monuments that still take your breath away. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, carved into the living rock of the cliffs, is considered one of the most beautiful buildings ever constructed. Its terraced colonnades seem to grow naturally from the desert landscape, creating a harmony between human ambition and natural majesty that few architects have ever achieved. But perhaps her greatest achievement was simply proving it could be done. For over 2 decades, she demonstrated that gender, that ancient, supposedly divine limitation, was just another obstacle that could be overcome through intelligence, determination, and political skill. She maintained the support of the priesthood, the loyalty of the army, the respect of foreign powers. She kept the Nile flooding, the sun rising, the cosmic order intact, all while wearing that incongruous, magnificent, utterly necessary, false beard. Yet even this remarkable story has its dark epilogue. After Hatshepsut's death, when Thutmose III finally took sole control of the throne, something troubling began to happen. Systematically, methodically, evidence of Hatshepsut's reign began to disappear. Her name was chiseled out of inscriptions. Her statues were defaced or buried. Her monuments were attributed to other pharaohs. It was as if someone was trying to erase her from history entirely, to pretend that this unprecedented reign, this proof that a woman could rule as effectively as any man, had never happened. This wasn't necessarily personal animosity, though we can't know for certain what Thutmose III felt about his stepmother. The erasure seems more ideological, as if the very existence of a successful female pharaoh was somehow uncomfortable for a society built on the assumption of male divine authority. But here's the beautiful irony. They failed. Despite their best efforts to erase her, enough evidence survived, hidden in forgotten tombs, carved too deeply to remove completely, whispered in stories passed down through generations. Hatshepsut's legacy endured. Today, we remember her not as the aberration her successors tried to paint her as, but as proof of something wonderful. That even in the most rigid, most tradition-bound societies, exceptional individuals can break through, can redefine what's possible, can prove that power, real power, has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with vision, courage, and the ability to make people believe in a better future. Sleep well, knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible becomes possible, and the world becomes a little more interesting, a little more fair, because someone refused to accept the limitations others tried to place on them. Think back, if you can, to your earliest memories of childhood. Perhaps you remember the simple joy of running through grass, the freedom to explore, to make mistakes, to be wonderfully, carelessly human. Now imagine, if you will, what it might have been like to be born knowing you were a god. For the sons of pharaohs, childhood wasn't a time of discovery and play. It was boot camp for divinity. From the moment they drew their first breath, these little boys were told they carried the blood of Ra, that they were destined to rule the world. that their every action, their every word, their every thought mattered to the cosmic order. Picture a 5-year-old child, barely old enough to tie his own sandals, being taught that when he grows up, he will be responsible for making the sun rise each morning. Imagine the weight of that knowledge, settling on small shoulders, creating a burden that most adults couldn't bear. Their days began before dawn, not with the luxury of sleeping in, but with lessons. Always lessons. Language instruction, because a future pharaoh must speak with perfect clarity. Mathematics, because managing an empire requires precise calculation. Religious studies, because understanding the gods is essential when you're expected to be one of them. But perhaps most importantly, they learned very early to watch their backs. You see, in a royal family with multiple wives and dozens of sons, every brother is also a potential rival. Every playmate might someday order your execution. Every childhood friendship carries the seeds of future complications. The palace children played games, yes, but these weren't the carefree games of ordinary children. They were strategic simulations, war games that taught military tactics, board games that developed political thinking. Even their toys were weapons in training. Miniature chariots, practice swords, everything designed to prepare them for the deadly, serious business of divine rulership. Listen to this, and let your heart break a little. For these small boys who could never simply soar, run and laugh and fall down and get back up without consequence. Every stumble was analyzed. Every outburst was recorded. Every moment of weakness was noted by tutors, priests, and rivals who might someday use such information. They couldn't make friends, not real friends. Every other child in the palace was either a sibling rival, a servant's child who could never be their equal, or a foreign hostage whose loyalty was professionally motivated, genuine companionship. That simple childhood pleasure of having someone who likes you just because was impossible. Their education was comprehensive and utterly relentless. History lessons that were actually intelligence briefings about enemy kingdoms. Geography that focused on strategic resources and invasion routes. Art classes that were really exercises in propaganda and religious symbolism. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was undertaken simply for joy. Even their bodies weren't their own. Royal children were constantly examined, measured, evaluated for signs of divine favor or, more ominously, genetic weakness. Any imperfection, any deviation from royal standards could be interpreted as a bad omen, a sign that the gods were displeased, a reason to reconsider. The succession, the loneliness must have been overwhelming. Imagine being surrounded by hundreds of people, all of whom treat you with elaborate ceremony, none of whom can ever just be with you. Everyone has an agenda. Everyone wants something. Everyone is calculating how your future power might benefit them. And always, always, hanging over everything, was the knowledge that most of them wouldn't survive to adulthood. Not all royal children died violently, though some certainly did. Many simply faded away, succumbing to the pressures, the expectations, the impossibility of being human while pretending to be divine. Those who did survive, who made it through childhood and adolescence, often emerged as young adults who had never experienced a single moment of genuine spontaneity, who had never known the simple pleasure of making a mistake without cosmic consequences, who had traded their humanity for divine authority before they were old enough to understand what they were giving up. The most successful royal children, the ones who eventually became pharaohs, learned to split themselves in two, to maintain the perfect divine facade while somehow, deep inside, preserving a small, secret, human core. The ones who couldn't master this internal division either broke under the pressure or became monsters, tyrants who forgot that beneath all the gold and ceremony, they were still just people. And so we return, gently, to a profound appreciation for the beautiful, ordinary, wonderfully anonymous life you live. You woke up this morning without anyone analyzing your dreams for political significance. You ate breakfast without a food taster. You made choices, small choices, big choices, without consulting astrologers or priests. You have something those royal children never had: the freedom to be imperfect, the luxury of privacy, the simple joy of relationships based on affection rather than political calculation. You can have a bad day without it being interpreted as a cosmic warning. You can make mistakes without threatening the stability of civilization. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, appreciate the magnificent ordinariness of your life, the beautiful anonymity, the precious freedom to be human without the crushing weight of divinity, without the constant performance of perfection, without the terrible loneliness of absolute power. Sleep well. In your wonderfully perfectly, blessedly, normal bed where no one expects you to save the world or make the sun rise or carry the weight of eternity on your shoulders. Just sleep and dream the free dreams of someone who belongs entirely to themselves. Chapter 3: Eternal Obsession. Building a Better Afterlife. If you could take anything with you to the afterlife, anything at all, what would you pack? Your phone, perhaps, to stay connected. Your favorite books. Your most comfortable clothes. Maybe some snacks for the journey. Well, the ancient Egyptians, particularly the royal ones, took this question very, very seriously. And their answers, preserved in tombs that served as time capsules, reveal a fascinating, almost endearing approach to eternal preparation. When Howard Carter first peered into Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, when his candle flickered in that stale air that hadn't been breathed for over 3,000 years, when he uttered those famous words, "I see wonderful things," he wasn't just looking at gold, though there was certainly plenty of that. He was looking at the most comprehensive, most meticulously planned, most utterly practical packing list in human history. Let's take inventory. shall we? Item by item, object by object, because the details, the beautiful, obsessive, almost neurotic attention to detail, tells us so much about how these people viewed death, not as an ending, but as the ultimate relocation. First, the obvious treasures, the golden burial mask that made Tutankhamun famous, weighing over 20 pounds of solid gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli and precious stones. A masterpiece of art, yes, but also practical protection for the journey ahead. Golden jewelry, hundreds of pieces, necklaces, bracelets, rings, amulets, each one carefully chosen not just for beauty, but for magical protection, specific spells and charms to ward off the dangers of the underworld, because apparently, even in paradise, you need good security. But then, we start to encounter the more surprising items. 130 walking sticks. Not ceremonial staffs, though there were those too, but actual, practical, everyday walking sticks. Some worn smooth by use, others barely touched. Why? You might wonder. Does someone need 130 walking sticks in the afterlife? Perhaps the journey to paradise is longer and more arduous than we imagine. Perhaps eternal life involves a lot of walking. Or perhaps Tutankhamun, who we know had physical disabilities, was simply ensuring he'd never, ever be caught without proper support. Clothing, mountains of clothing, linen tunics, some so fine they're almost transparent, others thick and practical for cooler climates. 115 pieces of underwear. Yes, underwear, because apparently even gods need fresh undergarments for eternity. The laundry situation in the afterlife must be complicated. Board games, 6 complete sets of Senet, that ancient Egyptian game that was both entertainment and spiritual preparation. Because what's eternal life without some way to pass the time? Imagine spending forever in paradise, but being really, really bored. Furniture, actual furniture, beds, chairs, stools, tables, all disassembled for easier transport, but complete with instruction scrolls, ancient IKEA manuals for reassembly in the next world. The idea that you might need to furnish your own corner of paradise is both practical and slightly disappointing. Chariots, 2 complete royal chariots, gilded and beautiful, because apparently public transportation in the afterlife is unreliable. These weren't just ceremonial, they were functional vehicles, wheels that could turn, axles that could bear weight, ready for whatever roads, or lack thereof, the next world might offer. Food. Oh, the food. Bread, dried and preserved. Wine, sealed in amphorae. Meat, duck, goose, beef, all carefully mummified. Fruits and vegetables, dates, figs, garlic, onions, a complete pantry for someone who, technically, no longer needs to eat. But here's where it gets really endearing. Personal items, a razor, for maintaining divine grooming standards in the afterlife. Perfume, because you want to smell nice for eternity. Sandals, multiple pairs, because even gods get blisters. Children's toys, yes, toys, found in the tomb of someone who died at 18, but apparently wanted to remember his childhood in the next world. Miniature animals, gaming pieces, simple pleasures preserved for eternal enjoyment. Musical instruments, harps, flutes, trumpets, because paradise without music isn't really paradise at all. The idea that you might want to jam with the gods shows a remarkably human approach to divinity. Even more practical items, oil lamps, because eternal life might have some dark corners. Mirrors, because looking good is important anywhere. Combs and cosmetics, because divine beauty requires maintenance, even after death. They packed like they were planning the most comprehensive, most luxurious, most eternally long camping trip in history. Every possible need, every conceivable want, every tiny comfort, carefully considered and included. The beautiful irony is that all this careful preparation, all this meticulous planning was based on the assumption that the afterlife would be fundamentally similar to this life, just better, more comfortable, more secure, more pleasant, but recognizably familiar. They imagined paradise as an upgraded version of Egypt, where you'd still need clothes and food and games and transportation and grooming supplies, where eternal life was just life, but with better weather and no political enemies. It's almost touching, this very human approach to the unknowable, this refusal to accept that death might mean true transformation, true transcendence. Instead, they packed for a destination they'd never seen, based on the assumption that, deep down, paradise would still need practical people, with practical things, living practical lives. The golden masks and precious jewels get all the attention, and rightly so. They're magnificent, but it's the underwear, the walking sticks, the board games, the razors, that really tell the story. These weren't gods preparing for some abstract spiritual existence. These were people, very rich, very powerful, very human people, packing for the longest journey anyone could imagine, bringing everything they thought they might need to feel at home in eternity. Sleep well tonight, knowing that your own journey, whatever it might hold, probably won't require quite so much luggage. Now, if you really want to understand the Egyptian approach to death, we need to talk about the practical side, the actual process of transforming a mortal body into something that could last forever. It's a procedure that took 70 days, required highly specialized knowledge and involved techniques that would make modern morticians quite impressed. Welcome to the ancient art of mummification. Consider this your beginner's guide to eternal preservation. The process begins in a place called the House of Purification, a workshop that's part medical facility, part sacred temple, part, well, butcher shop. The air here is thick with the scent of natron salt, resin, and something else, something that speaks of mortality and the human attempt to overcome it. First, the most delicate procedure, removing the brain. Now, you might assume this would involve opening the skull, perhaps through some surgical incision, but the Egyptian embalmers had developed a more elegant solution. Picture this, if you can, a long, thin bronze hook, curved at the end like a fishing hook, but much, much sharper. This tool is inserted through the nostril, carefully, methodically, up into the nasal cavity, then further, through the thin bone that separates the nose from the brain. The embalmer, working with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of an artist, uses this hook to liquefy the brain tissue, breaking it down into a substance that can be drained out the same way it entered, through the nose. It's a process that requires extraordinary skill. One wrong move, and the face, the all-important face, could be damaged. Why the brain, you might wonder? In Egyptian belief, the heart was the center of intelligence, emotion, the soul itself. The brain was just filler, unnecessary biological material that would only decompose and cause problems in the afterlife. Once the brain is removed, the real work begins. The body is moved to a preparation table, smooth stone that can be easily cleaned. The embalmers, wearing masks scented with pleasant herbs, begin the process of opening the body. A careful incision, made along the left side of the abdomen, allows access to the internal organs, the liver, lungs, stomach, intestines, all carefully removed. These organs, unlike the brain, are considered essential. They'll be preserved separately, placed in special jars, each protected by a different god. But the heart, the heart stays, because in the afterlife, the heart will be weighed against a feather, judged for its moral weight, its burden of sin. Without the heart, there can be no judgment, no passage to paradise. The heart must remain. Now comes the preservation phase. The empty body cavity is washed, cleansed, prepared. The corpse is then covered, completely covered, in natron salt. This isn't ordinary salt, but a special mixture, sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, found naturally in dried lake beds. For 70 days, exactly 70 days, the body lies buried in this salt, slowly, gradually drying out. The natron draws moisture from every cell, every tissue, every fiber, transforming flesh that would normally decay into something more like leather, preserved, stable, eternal. The smell during this process is distinctive. The sharp, alkaline scent of the natron, mixed with the resinous perfumes used to mask other odors. It's not unpleasant. Exactly, but it's unmistakable. The smell of time standing still. After 70 days, the body emerges, transformed. The skin, now darkened and dried, has the texture of old parchment. The features, though changed, remain recognizable. The person is still there, but different, ready for eternity. The body cavity, now empty and clean, is packed with sawdust, sand, linen rags, sometimes small packets of spices, whatever is needed to restore the body's shape, to make it look natural, lifelike. The incision is carefully sewn shut, often with elaborate stitching that's almost decorative. Then comes the wrapping. Oh, the wrapping. Hundreds of yards of linen strips, some fine as silk, others coarse and practical. The embalmers work systematically, starting with the fingers and toes, each digit wrapped individually, then the hands, the arms, the legs, the torso. Between the layers, amulets are placed, small magical protections, golden scarabs, Eye of Horus symbols, texts from the Book of the Dead, each one positioned according to ancient formulas, specific spells for specific locations, creating a body that's not just preserved, but magically protected. The wrapping process alone takes days, layer upon layer, each one soaked in resin, sticky, aromatic, permanent. The bandages aren't just covering the body, they're creating a new skin, a cocoon for transformation, a chrysalis for immortality. Finally, the face. The most important part is covered with a mask, sometimes gold for royalty, sometimes painted cartonnage for the wealthy, sometimes simple linen for the poor, but always a face, restored, idealized, prepared to meet the gods. The finished mummy, when complete, weighs more than the original body. The resin, the bandages, the amulets, all add substance, weight, presence. It's no longer just a person. It's become an object, a sacred object, designed to house a soul for eternity. The entire process, from death to final wrapping, takes about 70 days, the same amount of time. Egyptian astronomers noted that the star Sirius disappears from the sky before returning. Death and rebirth, loss and renewal, all connected in the cosmic cycle that governs everything. In the silence of the house of purification, surrounded by the tools of preservation, The careful workers practiced their ancient art, transforming mortality into eternity. One careful, methodical, strangely beautiful step at a time. Its preservation, taken to its logical, ultimate, almost obsessive conclusion. The refusal to accept that anything, even death, could be permanent. Sleep well in your beautifully temporary, perfectly mortal, wonderfully uncomplicated body. Have you ever stood in front of something so massive, so impossibly large, that your mind struggles to process it? Something that makes you feel wonderfully small and strangely humbled. The pyramids of Egypt, even today, even after thousands of years of weathering, still have that effect. But here's what most people don't understand. These weren't just tombs. They weren't simply elaborate burial chambers for dead kings. They were something far more ambitious, far more spiritually audacious. They were launch pads, cosmic elevators, stairways to heaven built of stone and determination and absolute, unwavering faith. Picture the Great Pyramid of Khufu in its original glory, not the weathered, sand-blasted monument we see today, but as it appeared 4,500 years ago when it was first completed. The entire structure, all 146 meters of it, was covered in polished white limestone, so smooth, so perfectly finished, that it gleamed like a jewel under the desert sun. This wasn't decoration. This was engineering, spiritual engineering. You see, the ancient Egyptians believed that the soul of the pharaoh, after death, needed to ascend to join Ra, the sun god, in his eternal journey across the sky. But how does a soul, however divine, make that leap from earth to heaven? The answer was light. The pyramid, with its polished surface, was designed to capture the sun's rays and reflect them skyward, creating a brilliant beam of light, a pathway of pure radiance that the pharaoh's soul could follow, like climbing a ladder made of sunbeams, from the darkness of the tomb to the eternal brightness of the heavens. Imagine seeing this in ancient times, standing in the desert at dawn, watching as the first rays of sunlight struck the pyramid's eastern face, and suddenly the entire structure blazed like a star, shooting light into the sky, a beacon visible for miles, announcing to gods and mortals alike that here was the gateway between worlds. But building such a thing, creating this artificial mountain, this monument to human ambition, required something that still, even today, seems almost impossible. The mobilization of an entire civilization for a single, extraordinary purpose. Contrary to what Hollywood would have you believe, the pyramids weren't built by slaves, whipped and driven by cruel overseers. The workers were ordinary people, farmers mostly, who came during the flood season, when their fields were underwater. When there was nothing else to do but build eternity, they were paid, fed, housed, treated with respect. Their villages have been excavated, their bones studied, and they tell a story of people who, while certainly worked hard, were well nourished, medically cared for, and, this is important, buried near the pyramids they helped build. An honor reserved for those who contributed to sacred work. But the labor, oh, the labor was extraordinary. Picture 20,000 people working in perfect coordination, moving blocks of stone that weighed as much as cars, using nothing but ropes, ramps, levers, and human muscle. Day after day, year after year, for over 20 years, each block had to be quarried, shaped, transported, lifted, positioned with absolute precision. A single mistake, a block out of place by even a few centimeters, could compromise the entire structure. The mathematical calculations required, the engineering knowledge, the sheer organizational complexity is staggering even by modern standards. Today, we complain about assembling furniture from IKEA, about following those confusing little diagrams, about finding the right screws. These people, with copper tools and rope, built artificial mountains. They created structures so precisely aligned that they point to specific stars, so carefully constructed that they've survived earthquakes, invasions, and 4 millennia of weather. The Great Pyramid, when completed, was the tallest building in the world, and remained so for over 3,000 years. Think about that. For longer than Christianity has existed. This was the highest point that human hands had ever reached toward heaven. But it wasn't just about height. Every dimension, every angle, every measurement was chosen for symbolic reasons. The pyramid's base perimeter, divided by its height, gives you pi, that fundamental mathematical constant. The angles correspond to important astronomical alignments. The internal chambers are positioned according to complex religious formulas. They weren't just building big, they were building meaningful. Every stone placed with purpose, every measurement calculated to reflect some aspect of the cosmic order. It was architecture as theology, engineering as prayer, construction as worship. And the workers, these ordinary farmers turned cosmic architects, must have understood at some level the magnitude of what they were creating. They were building eternity, creating something that would outlast their great-great-grandchildren. Participating in a project that connected earth to heaven, mortal effort to divine purpose. The limestone gleaming in the sun, the perfect geometry reaching toward the sky, the internal chambers aligned with the stars, every element working together to create not just a tomb, but a machine, a spiritual machine designed to transform a mortal king into an eternal God. To bridge the gap between human ambition and cosmic reality. Standing before a pyramid today, even in its weathered state, you're looking at humanity's greatest, most audacious, most successful attempt to build forever. To create something so permanent, so monumentally enduring that it makes our modern skyscrapers look like temporary camping tents. They succeeded, didn't they? 4,500 years later, we're still talking about them, still marveling at their achievement, still feeling that same sense of awe that must have struck ancient visitors when they saw these artificial mountains rising from the desert, these beacons of reflected sunlight, these stairways to eternity. Sleep tonight in your small, temporary, perfectly human-scaled dwelling, and dream, if you can, of what it might feel like to build something designed to last forever. Now we come to perhaps the most unsettling chapter in our story, a practice that reveals something profound and deeply disturbing about the nature of absolute power and what happens when human beings begin to believe, truly believe, that some lives matter infinitely more than others. In the royal cemeteries of Abydos, dating back to Egypt's very first dynasties, over 5,000 years ago, archaeologists made discoveries that, even by the standards of ancient burial practices, were extraordinary and deeply troubling. Picture, if you will, the tomb of Pharaoh Jer, one of Egypt's earliest kings. When excavators first opened his burial complex, they found not just the pharaoh's remains, but something else. Something that speaks to a mindset so key into modern thinking that it's difficult to process. Surrounding the royal burial chamber, in carefully arranged rows, lay the bodies of hundreds of people, men and women, young and old, servants, guards, craftsmen, officials, and most heartbreaking of all, dozens of dwarfs, people with dwarfism who were considered, in ancient Egyptian belief, to possess special magical powers. These weren't victims of violence. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of force or trauma. Instead, the archaeological evidence suggests something far more methodical, far more organized. These people had been systematically and apparently willingly sacrificed to accompany their divine master into the afterlife. The positioning of the bodies tells its own chilling story. Each person was found in the posture of their earthly service, guards lying with their weapons at their sides as if still on duty, servants positioned near storage jars and household implements, as if ready to resume their tasks, musicians with their instruments, scribes with their writing materials. It's as if the excavators noted with scientific detachment these people had simply laid down for a nap, still at their posts, still ready to serve, waiting for their master to wake up and require their assistance. Think about what this means, what this reveals about the ancient Egyptian conception of kingship. The pharaoh wasn't just taking his possessions to the afterlife. He was taking his people, living human beings, with their own hopes, dreams, families, were considered property, extensions of the royal will, equipment for the eternal journey. The dwarfs, those magical beings were apparently considered especially valuable. Their bodies show evidence of having lived privileged lives, well-fed, carefully tended, honored for their perceived supernatural abilities. Yet when their pharaoh died, their special status didn't save them. Instead, it made them essential for the royal journey to come. How did this happen? How were hundreds of people convinced or coerced to surrender their lives for someone else's afterlife? The archaeological evidence suggests, and this is perhaps the most disturbing part, that many went willingly. You see, in the earliest dynasties, the pharaoh wasn't just a political leader. He was a god, literally, divinely, a god walking among mortals. And gods, well, gods own everything, including the lives of their subjects. The concept of individual rights, of personal autonomy, of life as something that belongs to the individual, simply didn't exist. Imagine growing up in this world, being told from birth that your purpose, your entire reason for existing, is to serve the divine king. That your life has meaning only in relation to his needs. That the highest honor, the most glorious destiny you could possibly achieve would be to continue that service forever. The process, based on what we can reconstruct, was probably ritualized, ceremonial. These weren't brutal executions, but sacred transitions. The chosen servants would have been honored, celebrated, prepared for their eternal service through elaborate ceremonies. They may have taken poison or been gently suffocated in ways that preserved their bodies for the afterlife. Families might have felt pride that their loved one was selected for such honor. Children might have grown up hoping, dreaming, that they too might someday be deemed worthy of eternal royal service. It's a mindset so thoroughly alien to modern thinking that we can barely comprehend it. But here's what's truly sobering about these discoveries, this practice, this systematic sacrifice of human life for royal convenience didn't last. As Egyptian civilization developed, as ideas about death and the afterlife evolved, this particular custom disappeared. Later pharaohs, even the most powerful ones, were buried with objects, with representations of servants, with shabti figures that would magically come to life in the afterlife, but not with actual human beings. Something in Egyptian thinking shifted, evolved, became more humane, which raises the question, what made those early dynasties different? What created a culture where hundreds of people could be disposed of as casually as furniture, packed for a divine moving day? Perhaps it was the sheer newness of absolute power. The first pharaohs were creating kingship, defining what it meant to be divine, establishing the boundaries of royal authority. And perhaps, in that experimental phase, those boundaries extended too far. Or perhaps, and this is more disturbing, it reveals something fundamental about power itself, that when authority becomes absolute, when one person's will becomes law, when the distance between ruler and ruled becomes too vast, the humanity of those at the bottom simply disappears. These servants, these guards, these magical dwarfs, they weren't seen as people with their own inherent worth. They were accessories, valuable accessories, but accessories nonetheless. Things that made the Pharaoh's life more comfortable, and therefore things he would need in death as in life. The silence in those tombs, when the archaeologists first opened them, must have been profound. Hundreds of people lying in their eternal service, waiting for a master who would never wake, serving a god who had become simply dust. It's a reminder, perhaps, of how fragile, how precious, how hard-won are the ideas we take for granted, the notion that every life has value, that people belong to themselves, that no one, no matter how powerful, has the right to claim another person's existence. Sleep peacefully tonight, in a world where your life, thankfully, belongs entirely to you. After spending a fortune and decades of labor building the perfect eternal resting place, the ancient Egyptians faced a rather practical problem. How do you keep thieves from, well, stealing everything? You see, the very treasures that were meant to ensure a comfortable afterlife also made these tombs irresistible targets for anyone willing to risk divine displeasure for earthly wealth. And so, Egyptian tomb builders became, quite possibly, history's most creative security system designers. Picture yourself as a potential tomb robber approaching one of these ancient burial sites. The entrance seems straightforward enough. A doorway carved into rock, sealed with stones and mortar. But the moment you break through that first barrier, you enter a world designed specifically, methodically, to confuse, trap, and discourage you. The first challenge: false passages, corridors that lead nowhere, chambers that dead end after hundreds of feet of digging. You might spend days, weeks, following what appears to be the main passage, only to find yourself facing solid rock, while the real burial chamber lies hidden in an entirely different direction. Then, the pitfalls, literally. Deep shafts, carefully concealed under thin stone slabs, designed to open under the weight of an intruder, sending them tumbling into darkness. These weren't just obstacles, they were statements, reminders that this sacred space would defend itself against violation. Stone blocks, massive granite slabs, rigged to fall and seal passages behind you. So even if you managed to find the burial chamber, even if you successfully looted the treasures, you might find yourself permanently joining the Pharaoh's eternal court, whether you wanted to or not. But perhaps the most sophisticated security system was psychological. The walls of these tombs especially near the burial chambers, were covered with hieroglyphic warnings, curses, threats of divine retribution, designed to make even the boldest thief pause and reconsider. Here's what's fascinating, though. Despite popular belief, despite countless movies and novels, actual curses, specific magical threats were relatively rare in Egyptian tombs. Most of the warnings were, surprisingly, practical, almost bureaucratic. A typical tomb inscription might read, "As for any man who shall enter this tomb, in his impurity I will wring his neck like a bird," or, "The crocodile shall be against him in water, the snake against him on land. He who does anything bad to my tomb." These aren't mystical incantations. They're strongly worded warning signs, like posting "Beware of dog" in ancient Egyptian. The message was clear, straightforward, almost neighborly. "This space is protected by the gods. Please respect that, or else." The real curse, the genuine supernatural protection, was supposed to come from the gods themselves, who would automatically defend their chosen pharaoh without need for elaborate magical formulas. The tomb inscriptions were just reminders, legal notices, informing potential violators of the consequences. Which brings us to November 26, 1922, when a British archaeologist named Howard Carter made what he would later call the most exciting discovery of his life. Standing at the entrance to what would prove to be Tutankhamun's intact tomb, Carter held a candle through a small hole and peered into the darkness. When his colleague asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter uttered those now famous words, "Yes, wonderful things." And they were wonderful. Room after room of treasures that had lain undisturbed for over 3,000 years. Gold, jewels, furniture, chariots, everything a young pharaoh might need for eternity. It was the archaeological discovery of the century. But then, something curious began to happen. Lord Carnarvon, Carter's patron, the man who funded the expedition, died suddenly, just months after the tomb's opening, from an infected mosquito bite that developed into pneumonia. Then, other people connected to the expedition began dying. George J. Gould, a wealthy American who visited the tomb, died of fever. Arthur Mace, the archaeologist who helped Carter break down the sealed doorway, died of arsenic poisoning. Archibald Douglas Reed, who x-rayed the mummy, died mysteriously. The newspapers, always eager for a dramatic story, began connecting these deaths, suggesting that Tutankhamun's curse was claiming victims. The idea captured public imagination, creating a narrative that persists even today. But here's the thing. Howard Carter himself, the man who actually opened the tomb, who spent years cataloging its contents, who had more contact with the cursed artifacts than anyone, lived for another 17 years, dying peacefully in 1939 at the age of 64. And most of the expedition members lived normal, full lives. The deaths that did occur, while tragic, fell within normal statistical ranges for people of that age. living in that era, working in challenging conditions. The curse of the Pharaohs, as it became known, was more media creation than supernatural reality, a compelling story that sold newspapers and added mystery to archaeological discovery. But the real protection of the tombs came from more practical sources: hidden passages, falling stones, deadly drops, and the simple fact that, most of the time, the treasures weren't worth the risk. The security systems, both physical and psychological, worked not through magic, but through engineering, psychology, and the very human fear of disturbing the dead. Sleep tonight, knowing that the only curses you need to worry about are the ones you bring upon yourself through poor decisions and lack of respect for boundaries that others have, clearly, carefully marked. After all this talk of mummification and curses, of massive pyramids and human sacrifice, of the elaborate, almost obsessive preparations for death, you might wonder, what exactly were the ancient Egyptians hoping to achieve? What was this afterlife, this eternal destination, that justified such extraordinary effort? The answer lies in a place called the Field of Reeds, Sekhet Aru in ancient Egyptian. Their vision of paradise, their perfect world, waiting beyond death. Close your eyes and imagine, if you can, the most beautiful place you've ever seen. Perhaps a meadow in early morning, with mist rising from a gentle stream, or a garden where every flower blooms in perfect health, where the air is warm but never too hot, where there's always just enough of everything you need. The Field of Reeds was Egypt, but Egypt as it should be. Egypt without the floods that destroyed crops, without the droughts that brought famine, without the diseases that cut lives short, without the political intrigue that made even pharaohs sleep uneasily. Picture endless fields of grain, taller than a person, heavy with perfect kernels that never fail, never rot, never disappoint. Streams of clear water, flowing exactly where they're needed, never too much, never too little, always, perfectly, timed. In this place, the ancient texts tell us the deceased would live much as they had on earth, but better. They would farm, but the crops would grow without effort, without the back-breaking labor of earthly agriculture. They would eat, but the food would be more delicious, more nourishing, more satisfying than anything they had tasted in life. They would have homes, beautiful homes, but these dwellings would never decay, never need repair, never grow cold or uncomfortable. They would have families, relationships, community, but without the conflicts, the jealousies, the misunderstandings that complicate earthly love. The dead would work, because work, meaningful work, was considered essential to happiness. But this would be work without frustration, without failure, without the grinding pressure of survival. They would create, build, contribute, but every effort would succeed. Every project would flourish. Every day would end with the satisfaction of perfect accomplishment. There would be festivals, celebrations, music, and dancing. But without the hangovers, without the social anxiety, without the morning after regrets that shadow earthly pleasures, there would be learning, discovery, exploration, but without the struggle, the confusion, the painful process of making mistakes. It was, in essence, life, but with all the rough edges smoothed away, all the uncertainty removed, all the suffering simply absent. For the Pharaohs, who had spent their earthly existence managing crises, making impossible decisions, carrying the weight of an entire civilization on their shoulders. This promised something they had never experienced: peace, true, uninterrupted, eternal peace. Imagine Ramesses the Great, after 67 years of ruling, of building monuments, of fighting wars, of balancing the demands of gods and people and priests and nobles. Finally, able to rest, to put down the crown, the crook and flail, the symbols of authority that had defined every moment of his existence. Picture him, if you will, in the field of reeds. No longer the mighty Pharaoh, no longer the divine king, but simply a soul at peace, standing beside a quiet stream, clear water flowing over smooth stones, holding a simple fishing rod, waiting patiently for fish that will, eventually, certainly, bite. There are no urgent messages from governors, no reports of invading armies, no priests demanding attention for their temples, no courtiers competing for favor, just the gentle movement of water, the warm sun on his shoulders, and all the time in the world to simply be. The fish, when they come, are beautiful, perfect specimens that fight just enough to be interesting, but not so much as to be frustrating. And when caught, they transform into a meal more delicious than any feast he enjoyed in his palace, shared with companions who love him not for his power, not for his wealth, not for what he can do for them, but simply for who he is. This is the vision that sustained all those elaborate preparations, all those years of planning, all that careful preservation of the body and packing of possessions, not some abstract spiritual transcendence, but the promise of life, as it should be, life without the pain, the struggle, the endless compromises that define mortal existence. Perhaps, in the end, the ancient Egyptians understood something profound about happiness, that what we really want isn't to become something entirely different, but to become the best version of what we already are, to live the lives we're living, but without the fear, the suffering, the constant awareness that everything we love is temporary. In the field of reeds, nothing ends, nothing is lost, nothing ever disappoints tonight. As you drift toward sleep, perhaps you can imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to finally, after all the struggle, After all the uncertainty, after all the complicated Rousseau, difficult, beautiful mess of being human, to simply rest in a place where everything is exactly as it should be. The Pharaoh, fishing in his eternal stream, has finally found what every soul in every age has always truly wanted: peace. So here we are, at the end of our journey through the sands of time. We've walked together through the gilded corridors of power, witnessed the intimate moments of divine kings, and peered into the elaborate preparations they made for eternity. We began with a single day in the life of a pharaoh. That careful choreography of divinity, the morning rituals that transformed a mortal man into a living god. The weight of the crown, the burden of absolute power, the loneliness of being the bridge between heaven and earth. We've seen how they lived, surrounded by luxury that would make modern billionaires envious, yet trapped by the very divinity that gave them everything. Unable to show weakness, unable to be simply human, always performing, always perfect, always divine. We've explored the shadows behind the golden facades, the palace intrigue that turned every meal into a potential assassination, every advisor into a possible conspirator, every family member into a rival, the paranoia that came with unlimited power, the exhaustion of trusting no one completely. And we've delved deep into their ultimate obsession, their magnificent, almost desperate attempts to defeat death itself, the elaborate mummification processes, the massive pyramids reaching toward heaven, the treasures packed for an eternal journey, the servants sacrificed to continue their earthly service. Through it all, we've discovered something remarkable. These weren't the distant, incomprehensible gods that popular imagination has made them. They were people, complex, flawed, ambitious, frightened, hopeful people who happened to wield the power of gods. Ramesses the Great, builder of monuments, conqueror of nations, lived to be 91 years old and spent his final decades watching his body deteriorate, his teeth fall out, his strength fade. For all his divine power, he couldn't stop time, couldn't prevent the fundamental human experience of aging, of becoming mortal, of facing the same inevitable end that comes to everyone. Tutankhamun, the boy king, died at 18, possibly from malaria, possibly from a chariot accident, possibly from the political machinations that surrounded him. His elaborate tomb, with its thousands of precious objects, its careful preparations for eternity, couldn't save him from the simple, tragic fact that sometimes life is short, unfairly, brutally short. Cleopatra, brilliant, multilingual, politically astute, chose to end her own life rather than face the humiliation of defeat. Her divine status, her royal bloodline, her intelligence and charisma, none of it could protect her from the collapse of everything she had worked to build. They built for forever. These pharaohs. They created monuments designed to last until the end of time, wrote their names in stone, surrounded themselves with objects of such beauty and craftsmanship that they still take our breath away. Thousands of years later, and in a way, a strange, unexpected way, they succeeded. Their names do echo through time. Ramesses, Tutankhamun, Cleopatra, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten. We know these names, speak them, write about them, tell stories about them. They achieved a kind of immortality, a persistence through time that few humans ever attain, but not as they intended. Not as divine kings ruling eternal kingdoms, not as gods worshipped by generations of devoted subjects. Instead, they live on as characters, fascinating, complex, deeply human characters in the great story of civilization. We remember Ramesses not because he was divine, but because he was so thoroughly, ambitiously, almost comically human, building monument after monument to his own glory, putting his name on statues that weren't even his, trying so hard to be remembered that his very desperation makes him endearing. We're captivated by Tutankhamun not because of his royal power, but because of his youth, his mortality, the poignancy of a life cut short. The boy who became a god but never got to become a man. We admire Cleopatra not for her divine bloodline, but for her intelligence, her political acumen, her refusal to accept defeat, her humanity, her determination, her tragic end. The gods have fallen, but the people, the fascinating, complicated, gloriously human people behind those golden masks, they remain. They speak to us across millennia because, underneath all the divine trappings, all the royal protocol, all the elaborate death preparations, they were us. They feared death. As we do. They wanted to be remembered as we do. They made mistakes, poor decisions, trusted the wrong people, fell in love with the wrong partners, worried about their children, struggled with their health, felt lonely despite being surrounded by people. The pyramids still stand, weathered but magnificent. The mummies rest in museums, no longer in their eternal resting places, but still, somehow, present. The treasures gleam behind glass cases, beautiful, mysterious, touched by hands that turned to dust 3,000 years ago. And in the desert wind, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear them. Not the voices of gods, but the whispers of people, talking about the same things people have always talked about. Love, power, family, fear, hope, the desperate, beautiful, utterly human desire to matter, to be remembered, to leave something behind that says, I was here, I lived, I tried to make something beautiful, something lasting, something meaningful. They succeeded. These fallen gods, not in the way they planned, but in the way that matters most. They remind us, across the vast expanse of time, that human ambition, human creativity, human hope can create wonders, can build beauty that lasts, can touch the future in ways we never imagine. The gods have fallen, but their humanity, their essential, complicated, beautiful humanity, remains forever. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about these ancient pharaohs, these fallen gods, is how deeply, how intimately they continue to touch our daily lives in ways so subtle, so woven into the fabric of our existence that we barely notice. You woke up this morning and checked the date on a calendar that divides the year into 365 days. That precise measurement of time, that careful organization of seasons and months, comes to us from the banks of the Nile, where ancient astronomers watched the star Sirius and calculated the flooding cycles and gave us the framework for measuring our own mortal, precious time. If you're a woman and you applied makeup this morning, traced your eyes with liner, darkened your lashes, enhanced your lips, you were participating in a ritual that began in ancient Egypt, where both men and then women, pharaohs and commoners, used cosmetics not just for beauty, but for protection, for magic, for the transformation of the ordinary into something divine. The black coal around Egyptian eyes wasn't just decoration, it was medicine, protecting against infection and the harsh desert sun. It was ritual, marking the wearer as civilized, as human, as distinct from the animals of the wild. And it was magic, the belief that by making oneself beautiful, one could attract the favor of the gods. Every time you visit a government building, every time you interact with a bureaucracy, every time you experience the organized, systematic, sometimes maddening efficiency of a centralized state, you're encountering an invention of the pharaohs. The idea that one authority, one system, one set of laws could govern vast territories and diverse peoples. That's Egyptian thinking, Egyptian innovation, Egyptian legacy. The cat sleeping on your windowsill, the internet videos you watched of kittens playing, the entire modern obsession with feline companions. All of this traces back to those ancient temples along the Nile, where cats were sacred, where the goddess Bastet protected homes and families, where killing a cat was punishable by death. The Egyptians gave us the revolutionary idea that animals could be family, that love could cross species, that the divine could be found in a purr. Even our dreams of immortality, our fascination with preservation, our medical advances that extend life, our digital attempts to store memories, our photographs and videos and social media posts, all designed to make moments last forever. These echo the pharaoh's ultimate project. The refusal to accept that death has the final word. But here's what's beautiful, what's truly, wonderfully different about our modern inheritance from these ancient kings. We've taken their innovations, their discoveries, their brilliant solutions to human problems, and we've democratized them. Every person today, has access to things that were once reserved for gods. You can own a calendar, plan your time, mark important dates. You can enhance your appearance, transform yourself, express your identity through how you look. You can participate in governance, influence policy, shape the society you live in. You can love a pet unconditionally without having to build a temple. You can hope for longevity, for health, for a good life, without requiring an army of servants and tons of gold and elaborate burial preparations. The pharaohs built their immortality on the backs of thousands. Their comfort required the sacrifice of countless others. Their divinity depended on the suffering of mortals. But you can pursue happiness, build something meaningful, create beauty, love deeply, all while honoring the fundamental, precious dignity of every other person around you. You have what they spent lifetimes trying to achieve: freedom, the freedom to choose your own path, to define your own meaning, to love whom you choose, to believe what makes sense to you, to live authentically as yourself. Tonight, as you fall asleep, in your own bed, in your own home, surrounded by people who choose to love you, think about this gift, this inheritance from those ancient dreamers who built monuments to forever, but gave us something even better: the chance to live, truly live, in the precious, temporary, beautiful now. And so, our journey through the golden halls of ancient Egypt draws to its close. The stories have been told, the mysteries revealed. The pharaohs, in all their glory and humanity, have shared their secrets with us. Now they return to their eternal rest, back to the silent chambers carved deep in rock, back to the darkness that has held them for thousands upon thousands of years. The golden masks settle back into place. The treasures gleam quietly in their eternal display. The mummies, wrapped in their linen cocoons, resume their patient, endless waiting. The desert wind blows gently across the ancient stones, carrying away the echoes of our footsteps, the whispers of our voices, until once again there is only silence. The deep, profound, peaceful silence that has watched over these sacred places since the pyramids first caught the light of dawn. The sand shifts and settles, covering, recovering, keeping safe the last secrets, the final mysteries that even we, even after all our exploration, have not yet discovered. There are chambers still sealed, passages still hidden, stories still sleeping in the heart of the desert, waiting for some future day, some distant tomorrow. But that is for another time, another journey, another night of stories. Tonight, this night, your night has been filled with wonders. You have walked with kings, Breathe the air of ancient palaces. Witness the rise and fall of civilizations. You have seen how human ambition can build forever, and how human hearts remain unchanged across the vast expanse of time. And now it is time for you too to rest, to let the weight of the modern world slip away like sand through open fingers, to release the pressures, the deadlines, the endless notifications, the constant demands of contemporary life. Let your mind drift away from this moment, from this place. Float gently, like a small papyrus boat, on the calm waters of the evening Nile. No destination, no urgency, no need to steer or navigate or worry about where the current might take you. Feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort, into softness, into the embrace of perfect rest. Your breathing slows and deepens, matching the rhythm of the desert wind, in and out, like the eternal rising and setting of the sun. Over the pyramids, the ancient stories fade into whispers, then into silence, but they remain with you, like gentle guardians watching over your sleep. The pharaohs, in their golden splendor, the queens, in their eternal beauty, the gods and goddesses, with their timeless wisdom, all of them blessing your rest with their presence. Your eyelids grow heavy as the massive stone blocks that built the pyramids. Your muscles relax completely, releasing all tension, all worry, all thought. You are safe. You are peaceful. You are exactly where you need to be. The desert wind sings its ancient lullaby, a song without words, without melody, simply the sound of eternity breathing, the sound of time itself, gentle and patient and infinitely kind. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the mysteries of ancient Egypt. Thank you for walking these paths, for listening to these stories, for allowing yourself to wonder, to dream, to remember that beauty and mystery and magic still exist in our world. Now, rest, sleep deeply and peacefully. May your dreams be filled with golden light, with treasures beyond counting, with the warm, eternal sunshine of the ancient Nile. May you sleep like the pharaohs, in perfect, untroubled, everlasting peace, sweet dreams.